Yep, it's that time again. It is Saturday morning at 7:46 in the AM on the Australian Eastern Standard Time. Yes, we're at Standard Time. We're not in daylight savings or any crap like that. And this is the SitRep for the 11th of June. 11th of June, 2022. Here we go. Lots of stuff. There's a whole bunch of things. This camera's a bit weird. Hang on, let me just straighten that up. Good morning, Kieran. How you going? How are you all going? I hope you're all well. God damn it. I hope you're all well on this Saturday and feeling good. I've got a huge amount of stories today to go through. So I'm going to try and make this as painless and quick as possible. Just rip off the Band-Aid and we'll get into it. Just some things I want to kick off with, though. Just want to say thank you again to everyone who watches these. I really appreciate everyone who joins in. Really appreciate the comments that I get from people either during it or afterwards. It makes me feel all warm and fuzzy inside. I mean, no, it doesn't make me feel like all super warm and fuzzy inside. I'm not like hanging out from a dopamine hit off this sort of thing, but it just makes me realize that this is probably important to some people, I guess. If you don't want to watch mainstream media, and I don't blame you, if you don't want to troll through all the bad news in the world, and I, again, do not blame you, then this might be an okay option. However, I will say this. I haven't said this in a little while. This is my perspective on things. This is my take on things. It's not necessarily the best take on things. It's coming from my perspective. So I do encourage you to go do your own research and to look into things yourself. If there's anything that I say during these and you go, I don't know about that, go do your research, send me a message. People do that all the time. Not all the time, but sometimes people go, hey, you reported on this sort of thing, or not reported, you talked about this sort of thing. And I've got a different perspective on it. So I always really appreciate that. I like free speech. In case you haven't got that point yet, I really like free speech. I like dialogue. I like even arguments. I enjoy these things. I enjoy hearing other people's points of view. And that, I think, is becoming rarer and rarer in this world, that people are so butthurt by somebody just not agreeing with them straight up that we almost have to walk around on fucking eggshells for a lot of people nowadays. So, feel free to put the gloves on, put the mouth guard in, and come at me, bro. I want to hear it. Jackson Ang, thank you very much. Really appreciate that. Thanks for watching. Thanks for being on the YouTubes. Cool. All right, let's jump into it today. Two big things. I'm going to start in the sort of like strategic level sort of stuff. We're going to talk about the big picture kind of things and what I see happening in the world at the moment. And then we'll boil it down. We'll come into food stuff and we'll come into shortages in Australia in particular. We'll go on right at the end with some weather effect type stuff that's happening in the world, and even some traffic news, weather and traffic coming up live. No, it's not live at all. All right, let's start with Putin. What's Putin up to? I apologize about this light. I can't do anything about it now. I'm in it. I've started. Putin holds talks with Turkmenistan's president. I'm going to butcher this. Berdy Muhammadov. It's kind of like you've got some Russian name, Bormadov, and then you've got Muhammad, and you've crammed the two together. Berdy Muhammadov. Which kind of makes sense if you think about Turkmenistan. That could be my work coming in. Might have to go. No. Okay. That is fine. We can continue. All right. Where was I? President Putin had the president of Turkmenistan come into the country, visit. They had a chat. They're all friendly. He gave him a medal of friendship, ding, pinned it on him. And they had a bit of a press release and said, hey, we've got a lot of common goals here. We've got a lot of common enemies here. So what am I talking about here? Why am I talking about this? Because I think, Turkmenistan, this is in that kind of space of the old U.S.S.R. We've seen the Donbass region already make overtures to saying, hey, we want to become part of the Russian Federation. And a number of other smaller countries. And, who knows what's going on with Kazakhstan. I can't quite read the playbook there, but that could be another thing that's happening in that space there. Is Russia reforming the U.S.S.R? That's my question. No, they're not reforming the U.S.S.R. Is it the reboot? Is it U.S.S.R 2.0? Or is the Russian Federation, I think it would just probably be called the Russian Federation, is this expanding within itself? But then also the alliances, who is playing with who in this part of the world in this ball game? Because we're seeing a lot of other connections going on, primarily Russia and China. Their foreign minister and somebody else has come out and said that they need to increase a lot of ties with Russia for their oh man. Okay. Sorry, just work stuff. For their energy security and for their security picture as a whole. So what we're seeing here is, from a strategic level, I think this is more signs that we're seeing a confederation happen. So we're seeing Russia expand itself. And I've talked about this before, why Russia would probably be doing this. Sorry, I'm sneaking off to the side of the screen here. I'm just getting away from that sun. Why Russia would be doing this, and why China would be doing this as well. We're seeing they're looking down the barrel of a rapidly decreasing population and economic collapse. So it makes sense that if they're going to do something, they're going to do it now, or in this time period. So that's what they're doing. Pulling in other people, pulling in other countries. Russia by itself cannot sustain its own population. If it starts to pull in other countries that have maybe a better chance at doing that, then it's going to increase their numbers, pump up their numbers a little bit. You got to pump those numbers up. It's rookie numbers. Right. So that's what I'm seeing in the world at the moment. That's my take on it. Is Russia reforming into something that might resemble the U.S.S.R 2.0? What about China? What's China doing? China's come out overnight, and two of their officials, or one official and one person who's a bit of an expert, has come out and said, Taiwan, we're going to do it. So I'll start with a senior Chinese economist at a US-China forum has actually proposed that Beijing take over Taiwan and the Taiwan Semiconductor Manufacturing Company, the TSMC. So this is the important part of Taiwan, is these semiconductors. We know there's not enough semiconductors out in the world. Yesterday, I was doing some research and I tried to find a particular solar panel setup. It's by a company out of the US called PowerFilm. They look like they make really good stuff. I want to test out some of their stuff. Can't get it. Why can't I get it? Not enough semiconductors. They can't build them at the moment. Right, so semiconductors are a big issue in the world at the moment. They're coming out of Taiwan, which still bemuses me that we had one little island nation in the world creating something that was so essential to so many things in our world. So anyway, that's a pretty big reason why China would want to jump in here, why China would want to take over Taiwan, because then they have the stranglehold on those semiconductors. Anyway, this economist has come out, the economist. So this is the big point for me. It's an economist. When things start becoming about economic reasons, I think that's probably right now in time in our world, the main motivating factor. Okay, so Russia might want to claim glory or, future plan or something like that, but it's the economic factors that I think are the main motivating and driving force in our world at the moment. So when an economist comes out and says, hey, China should, the wording here is should seize Taiwan. Obviously, they're part of the Chinese Communist Party. They're pro-China, so they're going to say stuff like that. But they're saying that they should seize Taiwan, that it makes economic sense for them to seize Taiwan. This is one of the biggest signs I've seen yet. On the back of this, the Chinese defense ministry has told the US counterparts that Beijing will, quote, not hesitate to start a war over Taiwan. So pretty strong language there. We've seen some strong language coming out recently, and this is, again, another really quite strong piece of language coming out from China saying that they will not back down, that this is theirs and they will take it. So again, they're laying that groundwork for them to do it, for them to move in there. All right, so how does this affect us? Well, on top of this, NATO has started making overtures to, again, come down here into the Pacific, into this region, because of this conflict, or because of this potential conflict, I should say. So we've seen NATO has invited Japan to their summit, along with Australia, New Zealand, and South Korea. So it's pretty obvious now that NATO is gearing up to become the world police, and they're moving out of the NATO, the first part of that, North Atlantic. So they're moving out of their region, North Atlantic, spanning that area in between the US and Europe. So that's who the member states are. Into other parts of the world, into the exact opposite part of the world, really. So yeah, we're seeing this massive expansion of NATO on the cards, potentially. How's that going to affect us? Well, it's pretty obvious, I think. If you've ever heard me talk about NATO before, and especially about Article 5 within NATO, which drags any member state into war if any other member state is attacked, then it's pretty big news. It essentially sets up a what would you call it? A treaty alliance, which I look at as a domino effect or a house of cards, would probably be the best way to put it. So if Australia was to at some point go, yeah, we're going to become part of NATO, and then a rogue missile from Russia hits Finland, who somehow became part of NATO because Turkey got booted out, then Australia goes to war with Russia, even though it's over the other side of the world, doesn't necessarily have anything to do with us. We must respond as if our own country had been attacked. That's how Article 5 works. So that means that now all the world, large swathes of the world, are now interconnected in this treaty alliance. And I'm not saying that this is happening at the moment. I'm saying this is what could potentially happen down the road if what looks like what's happening continues happening. The positive part of that, I guess, is if China attacks South Korea or Australia, then that drags in everyone else into it. Are they busy doing their own things? Are they busy looking after their own countries right now? Are they busy scrambling, trying to heat and feed their own people? Yes. So the potential for a what I would call a cluster of fucks would be very high if this was to happen, I would say. We have many singular fucks happening around the world at the moment, and if they start to coagulate together, we could be caught into the technical term being a cluster fuck. So that's what's happening around the world. Alliances, things shifting, strategic sort of stuff moving around. Venezuelan's President Maduro, by all accounts not a great person, is visiting Iran. So he's just landed in Iran, and he's also visited Turkey and Algeria. So again, this kind of quasi-axis of evil. As we will look at it from the outside, I guess they probably think it's a good thing. But we're seeing these alliances form. We've seen more news. I don't have the report on this one, but more news about China and Russia becoming more interconnected. We're seeing all these countries who have sanctions on them from the US being driven into an alliance because of that. So that's the strategic sort of level sort of stuff that I'm looking at this morning. All right, let's jump into Australia. Australian farmers predict butter and cheese are next staples to sharply rise in price as world experiences a shortage of dairy products. Here's the reason why. Inflation. Fertilizer shortages, flood damage, and land acquisition, drought, and irrigation access. These are all the factors that they've named, and this is why we're going to be paying more for milk and cheese and any other dairy type product in the not too distant future here in Australia. We export this sort of stuff as well. I'm just going to keep smashing through these because there's a lot of them. Unseasonal rain creates havoc in Western Australia's winter food bowl in Carnarvon. So this week, Carnarvon recorded more than its monthly rainfall average in just one day. Local tomato grower, tomatoes. Local tomato grower has lost almost half of the season's crop because of it. 3 times more its usual rainfall than autumn. Whoa, shocking. Still though, it's not climate change. It's not heating ocean temperatures, which would obviously cause more evaporation, which would obviously cause more rain, which obviously has big effects on the humans. There, unseasonable rain, they're saying. But yeah, that's affecting things here in Australia. Australia, again, food processors warn gas crisis may shut them down and see food prices rise further. We are looking right now at the perfect storm for foods, like in Australia, but around the world. Now, the reason I'm pointing out these Australian ones is because if you've ever watched these before, I almost always say like, yes, but we are insulated in Australia. And this sort of stuff that I'm looking at, I would have expected to see maybe in December, maybe next year. Things are moving faster than I thought they were, than I thought they could. I mean, I've always got that sort of like worst case scenario, yep, everything's going to go to shit overnight plan in the back of my head. But I don't like to preach that a lot because I think it's just fear mongering a lot of the time. Now I'm looking at a lot of these stories. I'm like, okay, things are moving a little bit faster than I thought they were. So, if you've been sort of sitting on this sort of stuff and going, yeah, okay, I'll think about this in the future. I'll start doing, maybe light a fire under that right now. Maybe light a fire under your preps right now. Maybe start to think about really activating some of your plans to get long-term food storage into your own house, to look after you, to look after your family, to look after the people around you. Make sure that you are starting to really, really implement the plans to get gardens going. Start growing your own food now, even if it's just a little bit. I don't care what it is. Like I cannot recommend enough that you start taking control of your own food system. And yes, if you want to go down the path of hunting, then I highly recommend that you go through the process to get your firearms license and get your R license and become a hunter. Start practicing that, or even just go get a bow and start practicing it. But keep doing that. Rambodian. Good morning to you. Yeah, so food things aren't getting any better. UN warns of food catastrophe. Without fertilizer, shortages will spread from corn and wheat to all staple crops, including rice, with devastating impact on billions of people in Asia and South America too. This year's food crisis is about lack of access. Next year's could be about lack of food, of actual food. We can't grow it fast enough. Ukraine, that grain coming out of the port, like that were like, oh no, this is bad, it's not coming out of the port. And then they're like, oh, it looks like they're going to do a deal to do it. Oh no, it looks like Ukraine's burnt it. Oh no, it looks like some of it's still there and they're going to demine. Well, this morning we're back to bad on this one. There is no longer a political solution to the world food crisis. Ukraine safe passage for grain talks fail. So that's just fallen in a heap at the moment. Who knows what it'll be tomorrow, but it doesn't look good. This is time limited. Grain's not going to sit there and go, it's not going to be all right forever. So it does need to get out there timely. People also need to eat, especially in Africa. The thing I want to point out about this, though, there is no longer a political solution to the world food crisis. The people that are actually talking about this are saying, they're basically going, world food crisis, look what Putin's done. He did this. Even though there is no super solid evidence that the mining that happened within this area was Russian. it's quite possible that it was Ukrainian, even though it's not Russian ships that are stopping it going out right now. It is possible that it is doing that, but it's also possible that it's Ukrainian efforts that are stopping it going out. So, what they're trying to do is they're trying to tell us that this world food crisis, all these millions of people who are going to die within the next year because of starvation, because they can't get food, Putin's fault. 100% Putin's fault. Putin is a factor. The war that was started here in the Ukraine is definitely a factor, and I do not want to belittle that. However, it is not the only factor. It is a factor. There are so many other factors that are going into this. It's like, well, why can't we get the food from somewhere else? Because we have other bread baskets in the world. Ukraine and Russia are not the only bread baskets in the world. We can grow grain, we can grow food enough for people in the US, in Australia, in France, in India. So why can't we get it to Africa from those places? That's the question we need to be asking. Why? Why can't we get it from there? It's because those ones are also having problems. We're also experiencing problems. And one of the reasons that I kicked off doing these talks in the first place was based around a product when I saw a story about urea being stopped from export out of China. That was one of the trigger moments for me where I was like, this is big. This is going to have huge effects. And now we are starting to see the effects of that one thing. But there have been so many other things. The fuel crisis, the price of diesel, AdBlue, urea, nitrogen-based fertilizers, weather effects, all these things are adding up. And there's a whole heap more. There's a whole heap other 1%ers that are adding up into it that are causing this food catastrophe to happen. Do not believe the mainstream media if they start telling you it is all Putin's fault. Putin is a problem. Putin is part of it. And I say Putin is in the Russian invasion of Ukraine is part of it. It is not the whole and soul of it. Rambodian got my AB license, working on getting my H now. I'm up to the safety course, just got to get time to smash it out. Great work. Excellent. I love to hear that. That's really good. If people don't know what those acronyms are, then you need to start studying. A lot of little words: AB license, R license, H license. It all means different things for gun licenses within Australia, or within New South Wales at least. Pretty sure within Australia. All right, let's crack on. Let's talk about some civil unrest stuff. High tensions in protests against Israeli settlers in the West Bank village. Dozens of Palestinian protesters gathered in a highway intersection next to Isbat al-Tabib village in West Bank to demonstrate against Israeli settlers on Thursday. So increasing tension, still the tension going on here, more protests, a lot of protests going on in this area. It's very fractious what's going on here. And let's jump over to Greece now. Protesters throw Molotov cocktails at police after march in Thessaloniki. Isn't it weird? I can pronounce words that are in Arabic or from that area, from the Middle East, and I really struggle with Greek words. Anyway, Thessaloniki. That was the most Aussie Greek. Thessaloniki. I apologize to any of my Greek friends out there. Hopefully you can educate me on how to pronounce that. For reasons I couldn't find this morning, the Greek government thought it's a good idea to have armed police in their universities. If there's anyone out there who knows why this is happening, can you please let me know? I just didn't have the time to sort of go through it. I started looking into it and I was like, you know what, I've got to jump on this. So I don't know why, but they're putting armed police in their universities. Maybe it's something to do with active shooters. I can't quite figure it out. Anyway, the students aren't happy about it. They're protesting and throwing Molotov cocktails at the police forces. Protests in Greece, protests in Israel, are they going to affect us here in Australia? No, they are not. Why I like to point out these things, that protests are something that I believe are going to increase in frequency. And so it is beneficial for us to look at protests, how they operate, how they work, what happens in and around them, what the threats are in and around them, so that if we do find ourselves in one in Sydney or in Melbourne or wherever we are, that we can start to understand how we best protect ourselves. One of my lives I did yesterday or the day before was about gas masks, particularly around fires in high-rise apartments, in hotels, but also with riot control agents, gas masks. This might be something that you want to start thinking about. So that's why I'm throwing up these stories here. All right, let's talk about weather effects. I'm just going to whip through these. 25 dead in torrential Chinese rainfall in southern Chinese province. Flooding in Turkey, in Ankara, which has been very, very dry. This got sent to me by one of the people that I chat to quite often. Very, very dry in Turkey, and then bam, flash floods, like vehicles floating down the street, sort of flash floods. Forest fires in Spain prompting evacuation. These are all things to think about. Especially like, I know when a lot of people are thinking about the end of the world as we know it, they're thinking about, oh, I've got my bug out bag and I'm just going to run off into the wilderness and live out there. Like that should be your last option. All right. I mean, not your last option, but that should be a bit further down. In an emergency, probably the safest thing you're going to be able to do is bunker down in your home. Okay. That should be your primary. That's my primary. All right. That's what I think. So I've got the resources at my home. I know my home. I can defend my home, whatever it is. There are a lot of situations where my home is my castle. It is my main thing that I'm going to do. However, if there a fire or something like that is sweeping through, then my next thing is I need to get out and I need a safe location to get to. So there's other plans, along in that. But basically, that's what I'm talking about. So these are the sorts of things that I want you to start thinking about. Weather effects, flooding, and I mentioned the flooding when I was talking about the food crisis in Australia, but also, dairy and such what. Flooding, fires, these are big things in Australia. These are things that Aussies, we need to think about quite often. My New Zealander cousin bros, we need to think about things like tectonic plate shifts, so earthquakes and such what, maybe even volcanoes exploding, which has happened in the past 5 years. But, essentially in the military, we would always have these sort of two plans called sandbag and landslide. Sandbag is when we call sandbag, it means bunker down, fortify the area we're in, get ready for a two-way conversation with the bad dudes. Landslide is it's untenable to be here, get to the vehicles or do what we need to do to get out of here and evacuate to a safer location. So these are two things that I want you to think about. And in terms of weather effects, of these extreme weather effects, as you should know if you've ever listened to me before, I always say these things, I believe, are going to become more frequent and more dangerous, more prolific in the future as we continue going on. More huge rain weather events that we didn't see coming, more wind events, more fire events, more all these sorts of events. Jackson, I was a couple miles from the Santa Monica riots in 2020, crazy looting that took place. Yeah, that's another huge thing we need to worry about. Turkey is a wild card in this war. They are a NATO member that is supporting Russia, similar to Hungary. Absolutely agree with that. 100%. I look at Turkey and I'm like, why is nobody talking about Turkey? They are clearly doing deals with Russia. They are clearly doing deals with a number of other countries that I would say are kind of in that axis of evil sort of type thing. And yet they're in NATO. And not only in NATO, they're blocking NATO from expanding. It's like, does this not seem like you've let one of the enemies in the back door? I'm not saying that Turkey are an enemy, and I'm not saying Turkey are bad. I'm saying Turkey needs to be seen as more of a neutral country, if anything, right now. But it is a really, really interesting situation in Turkey. It's heaps more complex than that too. Turkey's definitely not a bad place. Also, what are they doing to Syria? Like, what's going on there with their own expansionist kind of agenda? So really interesting stuff that's happening there in Turkey that we need to look at. Yeah, Kieran, maybe Harp doing their things. But I think this is just also increased weather effects. I think we've been staring down the barrel at this for 50 years now, known it's coming for 50 years. It's just the manifestation of us understanding where we've been heading with our climate. All right, last thing I want to talk about today is multiple deaths reported in a 12-vehicle pileup in an Arkansas highway. Why am I talking about that? What's that? Who is John Galt? What's that got to do with anything here in Australia, right? Well, I want to exemplify this point. Emergencies aren't just the big things. Emergencies aren't just World War III. Emergencies aren't just, it's not just, oh shit, the zombie apocalypse is here. Quick, I'm going to go full Rick Grimes. I'm getting my bug out bag, and I'm getting out the door and going into the wilderness for forevermore. That's the big sort of like, whoa, end of the world sort of stuff. And is that likely to happen? Probably not. What is likely to happen is the everyday emergencies that will happen to us on a long enough timeline. It's things like getting caught in a vehicle accident. That is statistically one of the most likely dangerous things that are going to happen to you in your lifetime. Losing your job. Maybe your government all of a sudden mandated that you had to take some experimental unknown drug for a disease which you're statistically insignificant that you're going to be affected by, and you said, no, that doesn't make any sense to me. I'm not going to do that. And so then you lost your job. So these are the sorts of things. And from a personal note, there's a little bit of stuff going on with me with one of my friends at the moment who is suffering from something that it's basically overnight, like no job, in hospital, family support, nothing, like, it all ends. And it really just reminded me that everything that we have can be taken away from us in a second. That's why we prepare. We prepare, for the end of the world sort of stuff. That's there. And for me, that's kind of like the fun fun sort of stuff to prepare for. But in reality, I'm preparing to make sure that my family is looked after, that I've sorted out things, that I'm looking at my finances, however that looks. Maybe for you, it's insurance, it's life insurance or health insurance. Maybe it's burying gold nuggets in your backyard. Maybe it's stockpiling food and making sure that you can garden. Maybe it's teaching your family all the skills that you need to. Maybe it's creating community around you. These are all options that you should probably be considering. But whatever it is, I just want to remind everyone this morning that, you might get caught in a car accident and not be able to walk. You might get caught in a car accident and just lose your car, which is the way you get to work, or it might be your work. You might be an Uber driver or something like that. We need to plan for these things as well. We need to plan for the micro. We need to plan for the likely. We need to plan for those small everyday emergencies. If you don't have a first aid kit in your car and know how to use it, then again, as I always say, in this sort of situation, you then become a liability and not an asset. Be an asset and not a liability. All right, so that's it for today. I just want to leave you on that cheery note, just to think about life and to think about bringing preparedness into our lives in a holistic sense. It's not all about the big old nukes going off or anything like that. It's also about those little 1%ers. It's all about, can we look after ourselves in those small everyday emergencies? So think about that today. Think about getting yourself more prepared, getting your family more prepared, and building that community around you so that we can be better, safer human beings into the future. All right, yeah, be prepared, not surprised. That's a great little saying there, fruit of the spirit. Love it. All right, gang, that's it for today. As always, if you've got any questions, shoot them through to me. Stay safe out there. Keep your head on a swivel. Keep your eyes open. Keep prepping, and Semper Paratus.